Hanna-Barbera wasn't just Saturday morning fun, it was a cultural powerhouse shaping the imagination of millions. But beneath the colorful laughter, their shows often drew fire. From unexpected violence and cigarette ads to occult accusations and racial stereotypes, these cartoons weren't as innocent as they seemed. Today, we uncover 15 Hanna-Barbera series that left parents outraged and networks scrambling for damage control. Jonny Quest, 1964, too violent for kids. When Jonny Quest burst onto television in 1964, it felt revolutionary. This wasn't slapstick comedy, but a jet-age adventure cartoon filled with sleek spy gadgets, exotic villains, and non-stop action. Kids loved it, but parents and watchdog groups were outraged. Why? Because Jonny Quest was shockingly violent for its era. Bullets flew across screens, villains died on camera, and fistfights ended in bloody bruises, far more intense than anything Fred Flintstone or Yogi Bear ever faced. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera had taken a gamble. Inspired by pulp novels and adventure serials, co-creator Doug Wildey gave the show a cinematic look that required more money and effort than the studio usually spent. It was television animation pushing against its financial and cultural boundaries. Though ratings were strong, the high production costs combined with mounting criticism of its violence forced ABC to cancel after just one season. The controversy didn't end there. Decades later, critics revisited Jonny Quest for its outdated depictions of foreign cultures, which leaned on racial stereotypes in villains and side characters. Yet, despite its flaws, the series was resurrected through reruns, reboots, and comic books, becoming a cult favorite for generations who craved adventure. Jonny Quest remains a landmark, remembered both as a bold innovation and a lightning rod for controversy. The Flintstones, 1960, cartoons and cigarettes. At first glance, the Flintstones looked like lighthearted fun, a prehistoric parody of suburban life. But its debut in 1960 came with a shocking twist: cigarette advertising. Sponsored by Winston, early episodes featured Fred and Barney smoking on-screen, even breaking into jaunty jingles for the brand. For a show quickly embraced by children, the pairing of animation and tobacco sparked outrage among health advocates. The controversy snowballed as the 1960s unfolded. With mounting evidence about the dangers of smoking, Hanna-Barbera and ABC quietly phased out the ads, replacing them with kid-friendly sponsors like Welch's Grape Juice. Still, the scandal lingered, marking the Flintstones as one of the last primetime shows to openly promote cigarettes. But that wasn't the only storm. Critics later blasted the series for gender stereotypes, with Wilma and Betty cast as nagging housewives while Fred and Barney schemed their way through antics. Others accused it of being a blatant rip-off of Jackie Gleason's The Honeymooners. Yet, despite protests, the Flintstones cemented its place in history as the first successful primetime cartoon, paving the way for The Simpsons and beyond. Today, it's remembered fondly, but also as a reminder of how cartoons once blurred the line between comedy and controversy. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? 1969. The Occult Panic. When Scooby-Doo premiered in 1969, it was designed as a safe alternative to the violence of superhero cartoons and Jonny Quest. The formula, teen detectives, a lovable Great Dane, and spooky mysteries, seemed harmless. But the controversy didn't come from violence. Instead, parent groups claimed the series promoted occult themes. Ghosts, ghouls, witches, and haunted mansions sparked fears that children were being subtly introduced to witchcraft. CBS and Hanna-Barbera defended the show by pointing out that every monster was revealed as a fraud in the end. In fact, the message was rationality over superstition. But critics countered that the imagery alone was enough to frighten and disturb young audiences. The complaints grew louder in the 1980s, when spin-offs like The 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo introduced real demons and magical elements, fueling accusations that the franchise had gone too far. Despite the panic, Scooby's legacy only grew. The show spawned countless reboots, live-action films, and merchandise lines, becoming one of the studio's biggest moneymakers. Ironically, the very controversies that dogged it helped keep Scooby-Doo in the cultural spotlight. What began as a supposed danger to children became an enduring icon of Saturday morning nostalgia. Top Cat, 1961. Crime in a Cartoon Alley. When Top Cat debuted in 1961, it promised something different. A smooth-talking alley cat leading his gang of hustlers in New York City, inspired heavily by Phil Silvers' Sergeant. Bilko, the series followed Top Cat, TC, to his pals, as he hatched clever schemes while dodging Officer Dibble, the beat cop who always seemed one step behind. On paper, it was a charming slice of urban comedy. In practice, it drew backlash. Critics accused Top Cat of glamorizing crime. Parents bristled at the idea that children were being entertained by con artists, freeloaders, and tricksters. The cats rarely faced true consequences, often outwitting authority figures. Some stations even considered pulling the show for sending the wrong message about respect for the law. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera battled declining ratings in prime time. Though animated with striking detail and promoted as television's top cat, the series struggled against live-action competition. It lasted just one season in the U.S., but found surprising success overseas, especially in Latin America, where Don Gato y su Pandilla became a cult phenomenon, airing for decades. Today, Top Cat is remembered as both a product of its time and a daring experiment. What some saw as dangerous rebellion, others cherished as clever satire. Its controversy reveals how even a cartoon cat could challenge social norms about morality and authority. The Jetsons, 1962, a futuristic backlash. Hanna-Barbera imagined the future with the Jetsons, which premiered in 1962 as the space-age counterpart to the Flintstones. Viewers were dazzled by flying cars, robot maids, and video calls, a vision of tomorrow that felt within reach during the space race. But not everyone was impressed. Critics complained that beneath its futuristic gloss, the show reinforced tired gender roles. Jane Jetson was often portrayed as frivolous, shopping-obsessed, and dependent on George's paycheck, while daughter Judy dreamed only of dating pop stars. Feminist commentators blasted the cartoon for dressing up 1950s domestic stereotypes in cosmic clothing. The series also sparked debate about consumerism. The Jetsons' gadgets often malfunctioned, highlighting society's obsession with convenience and technology. While some viewers read this as satire, others felt it was normalizing materialism for kids. And in later decades, scholars revisited the show for its lack of diversity. A white, suburban nuclear family projected as the universal future. Though it lasted just one season initially, the Jetsons found new life in syndication and revivals during the 1980s. The controversies, rather than diminishing it, gave the show cultural weight. Its legacy is twofold: a whimsical prediction of the future and a mirror reflecting the social blind spots of its own time. Yogi Bear, 1958. Harmless hijinks or bad influence? Yogi Bear seemed like the least controversial of Hanna-Barbera's creations. A friendly brown bear in Jellystone Park with a knack for swiping pick-a-nick baskets alongside his sidekick, Boo Boo. Premiering in 1958 as part of the Huckleberry Hound Show, Yogi became so popular that he soon earned his own spin-off series. But even this seemingly harmless character stirred criticism. Park officials and conservationists objected, arguing that Yogi's antics encouraged children to ignore safety around wildlife. After all, he wasn't just stealing food, he was constantly tricking rangers and outsmarting authority figures. Critics claimed the show trivialized real dangers of interacting with bears and mocked the seriousness of park rules. Adding to the controversy was Yogi's smarter-than-the-average bear persona, which some parents viewed as teaching kids to disrespect rules and authority. Boo Boo's nervous warnings were almost always ignored, reinforcing the idea that rebellion was fun and consequence-free. Despite these concerns, Yogi became a merchandising powerhouse, spawning comics, films, and even theme park attractions. For many, his charm outweighed the critiques. But his legacy also highlights how even the most cheerful cartoon bear can spark debates about responsibility, safety, and the influence of television on young audiences. Wacky Races, 1968. Chaos on Wheels. When Wacky Races screeched onto television in 1968, it felt like pure fun. 11 eccentric drivers in bizarre vehicles competing in cross-country races. But behind the slapstick humor, the show sparked its share of controversy. Critics accused it of promoting reckless driving and glorifying cheating, particularly through Dick Dastardly, whose elaborate traps and dirty tricks often stole the spotlight. Parents worried that children would imitate the show's car crashes and wild stunts, mistaking them for harmless fun. Some even claimed it undermined fair play, since Dastardly's misbehavior was often rewarded with laughs, even if he never actually won. At a time when automobile safety was a serious national issue, watchdog groups weren't amused by kids cheering on cartoon pileups. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera took inspiration from slapstick comedy and the booming car culture of the 1960s. Each wacky design, from the Boulder Mobile to the creepy coupe, was engineered to capture young imaginations. But the sheer chaos worried networks, who limited the series to just 17 episodes. Still, its cult following never waned. Spin-offs, video games, and reboots kept the concept alive, though the original remains both beloved and criticized. For some, it was harmless entertainment. For others, it was proof that even cartoons could send kids racing down a dangerous road. The Smurfs, 1981 Hanna-Barbera adaptation, innocence or hidden symbolism? When Hanna-Barbera brought the Smurfs to American audiences in 1981, they didn't expect a cultural firestorm. The little blue creatures became a global sensation, with their sing-song voices and idyllic mushroom village enchanting millions. Yet controversy followed quickly. Critics alleged hidden messages within the show's design. Some accused it of promoting communism, pointing to the Smurfs' communal lifestyle, uniform clothing, and reliance on Papa Smurf as a quasi-political leader. Others saw Gargamel, with his hooked nose and obsession with gold, as a troubling anti-Semitic caricature. Religious groups even claimed the series normalized witchcraft through its spells and magical themes. The debates reached such intensity that articles and editorials dissected the Smurfs as though they were political propaganda rather than children's entertainment. Hanna-Barbera defended the series as innocent fun, but the suspicions persisted, fueled by the show's enormous popularity. Despite the uproar, the Smurfs ran for nearly a decade and won multiple Emmy Awards. Its controversy didn't destroy its legacy, it amplified it. Today, the Smurfs are remembered both as childhood icons and as one of the strangest battlegrounds of cultural paranoia in the 1980s. Hong Kong Phooey, 1974, Stereotypes in a Karate Suit. Hong Kong Phooey debuted in 1974 with a catchy theme song and an unusual premise: a mild-mannered janitor named Penry Pooch who transformed into a bumbling superhero marshal. Artist voiced by Scatman Crothers, the show quickly became a fan favorite for its slapstick charm. But the controversy was just as loud as the laughs. Critics pointed to its reliance on Asian stereotypes. The very title, Hong Kong Phooey, was seen as a crude parody of martial arts films, which were booming in popularity thanks to Bruce Lee. The show often played Chinese culture for cheap laughs, with exaggerated accents and cliches about kung fu wisdom. Some argued it mocked rather than celebrated Asian traditions, and in later decades, the show was reevaluated as an example of how casual racism was normalized in children's programming. Ironically, Penry himself was portrayed as incompetent, relying on luck and his cat sidekick to save the day, further complicating the message. Despite criticism, the show developed a cult following, with reruns airing for decades and merchandise keeping the brand alive. Its controversy stands as a reminder that what once passed as innocent fun can later be seen as damaging caricature. Speed Buggy, 1973. Too much like Scooby-Doo? When Speed Buggy roared onto the Saturday morning lineup in 1973, it was marketed as fast-paced fun, a talking dune buggy named Speedy who teamed up with three teens to solve mysteries and race against villains. On the surface, it looked harmless, but controversy grew over its uncanny similarity to Scooby-Doo. Critics accused Hanna-Barbera of recycling formulas to the point of laziness. Parents' groups questioned whether children were being fed the same stories with different costumes, simply swapping a Great Dane for a car. The show also drew heat for encouraging dangerous stunts. With Speed Buggy leaping off cliffs, racing through deserts, and outpacing criminals, some adults worried kids would try to mimic the daredevil antics with their bicycles or go-karts. Behind the scenes, Speed Buggy was indeed part of Hanna-Barbera's copycat era, where the studio rapidly produced variations on its most successful mystery-solving template. Though it only lasted 16 episodes, the show lived on in syndication, cementing its place as a cult favorite. Its controversy wasn't about explicit content, but about what it represented: the commercialization of a formula at the expense of creativity. For some, Speed Buggy is a guilty pleasure. For others, it's proof that even in the golden age of cartoons, the race for profits sometimes outpaced originality. Quick Draw McGraw, 1959. Cartoon violence in the Old West. Debuting in 1959, Quick Draw McGraw was Hanna-Barbera's first major attempt at a Western parody. Featuring a dim-witted sheriff horse and his clever burro sidekick, Baba Louie, the series was packed with slapstick shootouts, explosions, and wild brawls. Kids loved its silly take on cowboy culture, but parents weren't so sure. Almost immediately, watchdog groups criticized the level of cartoon violence. Quick Draw frequently carried a six-shooter, sometimes blasting it straight at villains, other times carelessly firing into the air. Even more controversial was his alter ego, El Kabong, a masked vigilante who smashed criminals over the head with a guitar. To adults, it looked like children were being taught that assault with weapons or guitars was hilarious. Adding to the scrutiny were complaints about Baba Louie, whose exaggerated accent was viewed as a crude stereotype of Mexican culture. Though played for laughs, critics later condemned the portrayal as insensitive and dismissive of Hispanic identity. Despite the backlash, the series ran for 3 years and became a syndication staple. The controversy didn't sink Quick Draw. Instead, it highlighted how changing cultural sensibilities were starting to challenge the old anything-goes rules of cartoon violence. Magilla Gorilla, 1964. Selling pets to kids. At first glance, Magilla Gorilla seemed charming, a lovable gorilla living in a pet shop, always hoping for adoption, but constantly returned because of his clumsy antics. Premiering in 1964, it had the colorful animation and catchy theme song of classic Hanna-Barbera fare. But the show sparked protests for one reason: its central premise. Animal welfare advocates argued that Magilla Gorilla normalized the idea of exotic animals being bought and sold like toys. The very concept of keeping a gorilla in a pet store was branded irresponsible and dangerous. Parents wrote letters to networks, warning that children might pressure families to buy wild pets without understanding the risks. Complicating matters, critics later revisited the show and pointed out subtle racial undertones, suggesting Magilla's outsider status and constant rejection carried uncomfortable parallels with segregation-era prejudice. Though unintentional, these readings gave the show a new layer of controversy in retrospect. Despite the backlash, Magilla Gorilla lasted 2 seasons and spawned toys, comics, and reruns. But its legacy is forever tied to the debates it provoked. What some saw as a silly cartoon about an unlucky ape, others saw as a troubling reflection of deeper societal issues. Captain Caveman and the Teen Angels, 1977. Sexism in a Stone Age package. When Captain Caveman and the Teen Angels premiered in 1977, it mashed together 2 popular formulas: a Scooby-Doo style mystery squad and a bumbling superhero. The Teen Angels, three stylish young women, teamed up with Captain Caveman, a grunting prehistoric brute unfrozen from ice, to solve crimes. On the surface, it was harmless fun, but critics quickly pounced. Feminist groups argued that the show reduced its female characters to stereotypes. The Teen Angels were portrayed as ditzy, fashion-obsessed, and frequently in need of rescue, while Caveman, loud, hairy, and clueless, was inexplicably treated as the hero. To many, it reinforced regressive gender roles at a time when women's liberation movements were gaining traction. Adding fuel to the fire was the character of Captain Caveman himself, who often resorted to clobbering foes with his club. Watchdog groups condemned the cartoon's reliance on violence as slapstick humor, echoing earlier criticisms of quick-draw McGraw. Parents feared it encouraged children to resolve conflicts with brute force rather than brains. Despite the backlash, the series thrived in syndication, spawning appearances in crossover specials for decades. Today, it stands as both a nostalgic relic and a case study in how even Saturday morning cartoons weren't immune to cultural debates about sexism and violence. Adam Ant and Secret Squirrel, 1965. Cold War cartoons. In 1965, Hanna-Barbera launched a double feature, Adam Ant and Secret Squirrel. Both were superhero parodies, with Adam Ant wielding atomic powers and Secret Squirrel parodying the world of spies and espionage. While kids adored the action and catchphrases, adults were less amused. Adam Ant, in particular, was accused of normalizing nuclear power for children. At the height of Cold War anxieties, critics claimed it trivialized the dangers of atomic energy by turning it into a punchline. Meanwhile, Secret Squirrel faced backlash for its constant gunplay, explosions, and spy gadgets. With James Bond fever gripping the era, watchdog groups worried the cartoon was teaching kids to glamorize espionage and violence. Cultural critics later pointed to racial caricatures in the villains, many of whom mimicked foreign accents in exaggerated, stereotypical ways. The controversies reflected broader tensions of the 1960s, where even light-hearted animation could be read as political commentary. Despite the complaints, both characters remained Hanna-Barbera staples, later revived in the 1990s. Their controversies, far from sinking them, made them symbols of how Cold War culture seeped into every corner of American media, even children's cartoons. Josie and the Pussycats, 1970. Exploitation behind the music. Josie and the Pussycats debuted in 1970 as Hanna-Barbera's answer to the teen music craze. Following an all-girl rock band on globe-trotting adventures, it blended catchy songs with mystery-solving antics. The show had instant appeal, but behind the bubblegum pop lay bitter controversy. The voice actresses, Janet Waldo, Jackie Joseph, and Barbara Perriott, recorded the characters' dialogue, but Hanna-Barbera sought real singers for the music. Enter producer Danny Jansen, who replaced the women's vocals with a studio trio led by Kathy Douglas. The decision outraged fans and cast members who felt the actresses were unfairly sidelined. Janet Waldo later spoke openly about how betrayed she felt, calling it an exploitation of her work. The show also faced criticism for racial stereotyping. Valerie, the first black female character in a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, was groundbreaking, but early scripts reportedly gave her fewer lines and often relegated her to background roles. Activists accused the studio of tokenism rather than true representation. Despite these controversies, Josie and the Pussycats became a cult hit, remembered for its music and style. But its troubled production history underscores how exploitation and inequality sometimes hid beneath the glitter of Saturday morning TV. Hanna-Barbera shaped generations, but not without sparking fires of outrage. From violence and stereotypes to hidden politics and exploitation, their cartoons reveal how even children's entertainment can mirror society's struggles. Which of these shocked you most? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more hidden histories of pop culture.